I'm the clerk for today's meeting. And if I could begin with get the meeting started and begin with the appointment of chair. Just to advise everyone that the chair of the SRS is run on a rota basis. Last year, it was available Morgan's turn to be chair, and this year it's Bridgen's turn. So I'd like to invite Councillor Good to take over as chair. Councillor Good, over to you.
Thanks, Gareth, and nice to see you all. Very pleased to be taking over as a chair. I'll try not to mess it up too much. So I believe moving to the agenda, the second point on the agenda is the appointment of the vice chair, which again, in keeping with the setup of the SRS committee, I believe will be from Cardiff, and therefore Councillor Dathan, who I believe is missing from us today, but will therefore take over as vice chair in my stead and will become chair next year. So that's just for noting for members. Moving to point 3 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. Do I have any apologies?
Just Councillor Diath from Cardiff, chair.
Okay, any others? I don't see any hands. Great, okay, that's brilliant. Moving on to point 4 then of the agenda, which is the approval of minutes of the last meeting held at the SRS Joint Committee, which was on the 21st of March 2023. I was absent from that meeting, it should be noted, so I'm not in a position to approve. Could I have a mover and a seconder for the minutes, please?
I'll move, Rees.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. And a second.
I can second that.
Yeah, whatever.
Great. Thank you, folks. Okay, swiftly moving down the list. I'm hoping Gareth is managed to write as quickly as I'm moving through the committee.
You're good so far, yeah.
Excellent. Point number 5, so that's to receive declarations of interest of personal or prejudicial nature under the Council's Code of Conduct. Does anyone want to raise a declaration of interest at this point? We'll of course take declarations as we move on if required. No. Okay, cool. So moving into the substantive part of the agenda. So our first report of the day is the Shared Regulatory Services Unaudited Statement of Accounts, for which I believe we have Gemma Jones, the Operational Manager Accountancy from SRS, to present the report. Could I have the report, please, Gemma? Thank you.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me. Hopefully you all received a copy of the statement of accounts this morning. I do apologise for the late circulation. I appreciate that members won't have had time to review them. We did have some resource issues at the start of the closing period, and Claire, the SRS accountant, has done a fantastic job in making up that time. So the accounts that have been circulated this morning are pretty much there. They're subject to the final QA review and sign off by the head of finance. So Matt Bomer's out of the office this week, but he'll be picking them up in the early part of next week. So we've done some initial QA, but we've just got those final checks to do. There is a slight rounding issue between the expenditure and funding analysis and the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. I suppose in terms of the accounts themselves, as the main points that I would be drawing out. In terms of revenue outturn, I think we outturned slightly better than had been reported in the previous monitoring, and in part that's because we benefited from some additional interest on the SRS balances in year, so that helped improve the outturn position. A big movement on the balance sheet is reflected by the movement in the pensions liability. So we had our triennial revaluation in year, and that's reflected on a roll forward basis as at 31st of March 2023, and that's been a significant reduction in the pension liability. It's now dropped to just 3.4 million. I know this has been a picture that's been reflected across Wales, and but some authorities seeing moving into a pensions asset rather than a liability. That's not the case for us, but our pension liability has reduced significantly. Other key changes to the accounts are 2 vehicles were purchased in year, so that's gone through the capital adjustments and is reflected in the property, plant and equipment balance on the balance sheet. And in terms of other significant movements, there has been a reduction on the usable reserves of the shared regulatory service, and that's partly down to the deficit that was reported in year, albeit a reduced deficit from the deficit we were indicating in the monitoring throughout the year. In terms of the deficit, obviously we can pick this up in more detail as we go into the annual report, but that was largely due to the authority-specific areas of the service rather than the core element of the service, and therefore that will be picked up by the respective authorities. And those are the key points I was going to draw out on the accounts themselves, but I'm happy to take any questions. And I think the approach that we were proposing is that if members are happy to approve them in principle, but we're also happy to receive any queries either today or via email. We would be hoping to get the accounts approved by the 28th of June, which would enable us to meet that 30th of June deadline. And then submit the accounts to the auditors to start the audit process by the 1st of July. The audit process will run until sometime in November. So the auditors are tasked with completing the audit by the end of November this year. And then the head of finance for the Vale, when he's back, Matt Bomer, will be doing his, just final confirmation that he's happy with the accounts. And then we'll be looking to get those signed off. Obviously, if during the QA process we identify any issues to the accounts, we'll of course notify all members of the committee and ask for electronic confirmation that members are happy with those changes to the accounts. Okay.
Great. Thanks a lot for that, Gemma. I think, bear in mind that I think we received the appendix this morning, so I imagine the majority of members, including myself, haven't had a tremendous amount of time to flick through them. I did a very quick scroll down my screen earlier. But if we can, if members do have any questions at this point, then please feel free to raise them. But I think, as Gemma says, if there are any queries or questions, then officers are happy to take them via email post the meeting. Does anyone have anything they want to raise at this point? Okay, I don't see any hands. So what the report asks us to do as a committee is to review and note the contents. So could I have a mover for the report, please? Don't all rush at once.
I can move that, Chair.
Excellent.
And I'll
Thank you.
Councillor Sivignon.
Right, so I think we've got Councillor Lewis has moved and Councillor Sivignon has seconded. So we'll move on from there. Thank you for that, Gemma. So moving on to our next part of the reports. So we should, I think, sorry, just checking my notes. So we're moving on to the annual report, which I think is Helen starting this presentation. So Helen, over to you for the annual report.
Thank you, Chair. And I wonder, I'm very conscious that Gemma has another commitment this morning, and I wonder whether it might make sense if Gemma were to give her input, the financial input, as part of this annual report. I think that picks up from 2.63 onwards, and then I can provide the service specific input afterwards.
Yeah, I'm more than content to have that happen if there's no objections from members. No? Okay, cool. Yeah, Helen, that sounds great. Gemma, fire away.
Okay, thank you very much. So in terms of the financial position, we had been indicating a likely deficit outturn position in the monitoring throughout the year. The outturn position was improved on that. So the deficit position did reduce. And we did pick up certainly in the most recent monitoring that deficit element was likely to relate to the authority specific services. That's not to understate that there were significant inflationary pressures in year. So the budget was predicated on a 2% pay award. And as we're all aware, that the eventual pay award was significantly above that, in the region to 6 to 7% on average across the shared regulatory services staff. So that did place a significant pressure in year. I know Helen's previously discussed the vacant posts in the service, and that in part has played a role in addressing that pressure in year. And it is part of the picture in terms of why we haven't had an overall overspend in the core area of the service. So in terms of the overall outturn, we had a favourable variance on the Bridgend element of the service of 74,000, an adverse variance of 125,000 against the Cardiff element of the service, and 12,000 against the Vale of Morgan element of the service in terms of the splits. So a total adverse variance of 63,000 that at this stage has been drawn down from reserves, but we will be seeking to address that with the respective authorities. So that's just picking at the table that's shown under paragraph 2.67 of the report. So as I mentioned, the overspend is related to the authority specific element of the service, and that's particularly significant for the Cardiff element of the service at 215,000, but also for Vale of Morgan at 45,000. And the majority of both of those overspends relates to licensing. So specifically taxi licensing. And I think particularly the Cardiff element, that's likely to be the picture going forward as well into 23-24. In terms of core services, there are favourable variances there, so offsetting in part some of those overspends on the authority specific services, and those are set out just below paragraph 2.83. And there's also detailed in the appendix and below that table. So I'll just quickly run through those. So an overspend within the animal services element of the service. Environmental services achieved a balanced position. 18,000 underspend within the food element of the service. Underspend of 9,000 against housing services. Health and safety and communicable disease services, overspend of 62,000. Pollution services, underspend of 64,000, and then trading standards, a significant underspend of 288,000 there. There are some challenges that have been picked up moving forward. And I suppose I'd want to pick up the challenge going to 23-24 would be in part addressing the eventual pay award in year. So we've assumed an element of pay award, but the expectation is that will be higher. So that will be something that we'll need to pick up in year. And there are some assumed savings in year as well. Those are the main points I was going to draw up, but I'm happy to take any questions on the report. And Claire who's the accountant for the services, here to pick up the any more detailed issues as well.
Great, thanks for that, Gemma. Bearing in mind that Gemma has other commitments, if members do have any questions on the financial element of the report, I'll take them now, and I think it probably will be easier as we go through the report as well to take them in part rather than at the end, because we'll have a sort of log jam of different questions potentially. So do I have any questions on the financial outturn element of the annual report? No. Oh yeah, I can see Councillor Sylvie has indicated she'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, thanks, Gemma, and thank you, Chair. So, Gemma, just on the licensing, sort of looking ahead, how is that? How can we resolve that in terms of that always being that pressure there? How's that going to look for us in the future?
I'm going to ask probably Helen and Claire to come in on a certain extent of this. I mean, my understanding is that conversations have taken place specifically with Cardiff on this element. Claire, are you able to add a bit more detail around the licensing overspend, please?
I can see Matthew wants to come in. I don't know if that's
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, just to confirm, the overspend in relation to licensing and the underachievement of income targets relate to how Cardiff set up the income target relating to taxi licensing at the start of the contract with SRS. We need to do some work internally with our corporate finance teams to rebalance that so we can get to a position that's sustainable moving forward. It's been reported as a underachieving since SRS started, so it's not changed. And it's not getting in a worse position as such. It just needs to be what we call an accounting exercise done to rebalance and to put money back into SRS. So in terms of that specific area, that's all. Is that okay? Thanks.
great. Thanks for that. Matthew, does that satisfy you, Councillor? Excellent. Cool. Any other questions from members? I guess just from me, Gemma, I think you'd begin, because a lot of the underspend seems to come from vacant posts, and I do have some questions later on, which is probably more specific to HR colleagues. But are we sort of keeping a close eye on that? And because obviously, you know, the ambition would be that we would appoint to all of those positions and therefore find ourselves then without those underspends and facing those pay increases. So are we confident that we're able to continue with that, with those posts being filled going forward?
So we set our budget based on an assumed establishment, so we're not assuming that those posts will be vacant when we set the budget. I suppose the issue is the expectation in terms of the pay award. Despite having increased that up, it wasn't significant to reflect the kind of likely direction of the pay award. So I think that's where the pressure comes from. It is an issue across not just the SRS, across, you know, all the council's monitoring, is that vacant post does to a certain extent mask some of those inflationary pressures that we're seeing in the budgets, and so it's really important that in the monitoring and throughout the year, and I know that this will be this done, that we're making clear that those underlying pressures are still there. So I think that, you know, the pressure around pay award was in the region of, you know, 260,000 last year. It should be less this year, but obviously those negotiations are still being undertaken.
Great, thanks for that. Any more member contributions for Gemma before we move on? No? Okay, cool. Thank you for that, Gemma. So I imagine we're now going back to Helen for the initial start, the start of the report.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you, Chair. It's always good to mix things up sometimes, isn't it? So yes, onto the service-specific element of the annual report, and just for members, and I know you'll be familiar with this, but the background to this annual report is the fact that it is enshrined in the joint working agreement, and we're required to produce an annual report that covers the operational and financial performance of the service for the preceding year. So we're looking at 22-23 work of shared regulatory services, and this is actually the 8th annual report that we've produced. And if the content of the report is agreed today, then again, a requirement of the joint working agreement is that it will be sent along with the SRS business plan, which is later on in the agenda, to the 3 chief executives of the partner councils. So I will skip over some of this background because hopefully it is familiar territory for you all. And I'll take you to point 2, which is the key issues for consideration. And here we kind of get that snapshot of where we were when we drafted the business plan for the previous year. And at that time, of course, we were thankfully returning to some normality after the difficulties of running the service through the COVID pandemic and the additional pressures that brought with supporting TTP functions and the COVID enforcement of the various restrictions. And at 2.2, just mention the fact that we ensured that the business plan going into 22-23 was sufficiently realistic to recognise that we had, yes, lost ground to recover, but also we didn't know at that time if we were going to see resurgence, possibly some new variants of concern with COVID. So I think it's interesting to reflect just how far the world has moved on in the space of that year. And unfortunately now we are in a much stronger place in terms of recovering that business as usual. So I'll take you to the next section, which is human resources. And I'm sure you won't be surprised that the first thing I'll mention here is the recruitment and retention issue, something, Chair, you've already hinted at with the vacancies, etc. That is continuing to prove challenging. It's not unique to SRS. It's affecting regulatory services right across Wales and probably right across the UK. A number of factors which members will be aware of is a limited pool of suitably qualified staff, and we've got an already ageing workforce. So we have made a commitment to growing our own, and we're absolutely determined that will be a very positive way to deal with that for the longer term, but clearly it will take time to get there. And with that in mind, we forged some excellent links with academic institutions, and Christina in particular has made those links, and also with the professional bodies, so that we are in the very best place to assist newcomers into the profession to get that experience that they need. Also, we are still leading on the development of the regulatory apprenticeship for Wales, which is much needed, and I'm really pleased to say that that continues to make progress, albeit slow progress, towards having that apprenticeship in place. So 2.4 and 2.5 in the report, this has been brought to members' attention previously. This is the survey that we conducted of SRS staff back last summer, and some really interesting feedback coming out of that. Positive feedback on support of colleagues and managers, the flexibility and work-life balance of working in the service, and clarity over what is expected in one's role. Other areas which scored less well around feeling recognised, valued and rewarded fairly, adequacy of growth and development opportunities. Also, incidentally, in that survey, we had quite a lot of feedback where staff were vocalising just how busy the service is, just what their workloads are. So clearly still some work for us to do there to tease some of that out and to find ways within the budget constraints that we've got of making the service as appealing a place to come to work for and to stay, to remain working for. So I'll move down to the report now, Chair. So we've got some information then about sickness absence, which we always provide at year end. And you'll see that the overall sickness absence for 22-23 was 10.47 days per full-time equivalent person. That's a slight increase on the previous year. However, when you drill into that, you'll see that, again, long-term absence is the main contributor to that overall sickness absence. We have had a number of people on long-term absence, but I'm hopeful that that position is changing and we will be able to report lower absence in the future, in future quarters. I'm not sure if here would be a good place to stop for any questions, Chair.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Thank you for that, Helen. So I've got one or two to kick off, if if that's all right. So I just wanted to pick up on the point on the staff survey and around the recognition and reward element that is scoring less well. I just wanted to sort of dig into that a little bit. And obviously, you know, we all accept that we live in a world where public sector has to be very cognizant of the public purse, and there's, you know, perhaps limited things that can be done compared to sort of a private sector company. But you know, what actions are we looking to take to sort of ensure that when we do get those qualified members of staff joining the service, they are feeling that they are, you know, very, very well recognised and respected in the work that they do?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Difficulties we have with budgets mean that we, much as we would like to, we're not in a position to give everybody a pay award. But there are so many softer things that can be done, which will make the service as attractive a place as possible. And chief among those, we have for a number of years had a tradition of supporting officers as they undertake further education, so match funding degree courses, which obviously are beneficial for the service, yes, but beneficial for the individuals too. And then simple things like ensuring that there are clear pathways for career progression. That's something else that we're looking at. And again, that's really, really important as we're looking to grow our own, so that they recognise pathways into the various professions represented in SRS. And I would say things like ensuring variety in the roles of staff as well, so that they feel that they are getting lots of different experience and they're not feeling that they're just turning up and doing the same job day in, day out. So those are the types of things that we can do, and that is what we will have in a plan to roll those out.
Right. And on the grow your own thing, I know you mentioned a lot of the links with universities and higher education, but what sort of work is being done at sort of the below degree level to sort of to encourage people to maybe join as apprentices that then actually, with the match funding on degrees could end up, as their career progresses, finding themselves actually wanting to be a highly qualified member of staff.
Yes, and it's really interesting that the careers within SRS are fantastic careers to have, but they're quite invisible to students and to school pupils. So there is a piece of work, and I think that's a piece of work that needs to be done nationally as well as locally to raise awareness that environmental health is a fantastic career to come into, as is trading standards and licensing. So I think as and when we are that step closer with the regulatory apprenticeship, actually pushing those messages and getting interest, again, will be a really important part of us rolling out that piece of work.
Yeah. And I think it's, there's a real opportunity as well, I think, to sort of capture the zeitgeist a little bit. Yeah, I'm always amazed when I meet with school children how much more they know and care about the environment than basically anyone in my generation, and is always quite remarkable the number of times I've seen primary school kids browbeating their parents for not putting things in the right bin or similar. I think is amazing. So hopefully we'll as time goes on find ourselves with a new generation of very passionate environmental and trading standards officers that can lead us forward to a decarbonised, well-regulated world. And then just a last one for me. So just picking up on the long-term sick table on 2.9. I think it's positive that obviously there's a slight decrease in long-term sickness from 21-22 to 22-23, which I think is really positive. I just wanted to sort of check in on that because, I think if you sort of extrapolate out the data that you've got for 2021, where obviously sickness is much lower, presumably because everyone is working from home, and that was sort of the reality of COVID, so people were less inclined to take time off because actually they were already at home and they could do what they could do while also sort of looking after themselves. And I just wondered if there was any mapping being completed to sort of look at where long-term sick is happening. Obviously, with a lot of that, it will just be very long-term sick and reasons that mean that people can't work. But I wonder what we are looking at to ensure that where, you know, if at all possible, we do sort of say to people, well, that we can make a reasonable adjustment for this role, and that actually we can put you maybe as working from home on a longer term basis to try and support you in, you know, on the one hand, ensuring that you don't have that bottleneck therefore of that members of staff being off for a long time, while equally sort of giving them the time that they need to recover.
I believe that's already
Right.
reflected in the way we deliver the service, Chair. It has always been such an agile service. So home working, you know, predates or agile working predates the response to the COVID pandemic. So there would be no difficulty if people are feeling a bit under the weather, but actually well enough to work from home to do that, and that's the way you know the service works. Clearly, if they're sufficiently unwell, then they need to take leave for their own well-being.
Okay, cool. Well, that's very reassuring to hear. So that's the last one for me. Do we have any members who want to raise anything in this particular section? No. Okay, cool. So moving on to the next bit then, Helen, which is that?
So this is 2.10. We're starting to look at operational performance now. So I won't dwell too long on this, but as I said earlier, you know, we ensured that the business plan was sufficiently realistic as we face the resource pressures and uncertainty over exactly what the course of coronavirus was going to be. So as a result, performance against the 22-23 business plan is very positive. All statutory documents published on time, targets and actions identified in the plan were in the main achieved. Those elements that for whatever reason weren't achieved, often as a result of circumstances beyond our control, they are largely being rolled over into the new 23-24 plan. So from 2.11 onwards, I'm just going to, as we always do at this point in the annual report, just pull out the three public accountability measures that we are responsible for contributing to. And the first of those is PAM 023, which is the broadly compliant figure for food premises. And clearly, it's a measure that provides an indication of how well a food business complies with food hygiene legislation. And as you'll see in figure 2, the broadly compliant figures for the three partner authorities are very, very high, certainly above the national UK average of 95%. So this is all the or the proportion of food premises that are scoring 3 food hygiene rating scheme score or above. We're still waiting. We mentioned this throughout the year. We're still waiting to see what effect the possibly poorer compliance that we're seeing in some premises that we're visiting now, how that will feed through into these figures. We're not seeing it yet. We really did think that we might see a dip in these figures, but clearly, as you'll see from figure 2, that hasn't happened as yet. And then I'll drop down to the other two public accountability measures that we are responsible for contributing to, and that's PAM 013 and PAM 045, and these relate to empty homes. So PAM 013 measures the percentage of empty private properties brought back into use, and PAM 045 the number of new homes created as a result of bringing empty properties back into use. And then the remainder of that section goes into some detail of the work that we've been doing in relation to empty homes in both Bridgend and Cardiff areas. And we often get asked, why does the Vale not feature there? And that's simply been a quirk of the way that the service was set up. and it hasn't until now been an authority-specific function for us within the Vale of Glamorgan. However, I'm pleased to advise that there will be an additional resource to cover that work for the Vale of Glamorgan council area. So in future years, we should be able to report on all 3 empty homes landscapes. So again, if there are any questions there, Chair, might be a good place to start.
Yeah, thanks for that, Helen. I do think it's really encouraging to see the work on the empty properties. Obviously, that is a big issue across Wales, across the UK as well. And I'm particularly encouraged to see 121 properties in Bridgend being worked with. We've just announced a new fund as well to help support that. So I'm really hopeful that we will see positive outcomes in that. And it'd be great to have a longer update, perhaps just you and I, on that in a Bridgend specific way, which I won't waste other members' time on now. But that's really helpful. I don't think I've got any specific questions around this, except for one on the food hygiene, but I'll save that for the team later on. Do any other members have any questions at this point? No? Okay, cool. Feel free to carry on, Helen.
Lovely, thank you. So we're on 2.12 now, Chair. And this is figure 3. You'll see it is it's been a bit of a firm favourite in reports to Joint Committee over the last year. The FSA COVID-19 Local Authority Recovery Plan, which we worked to for the entirety of the 22-23 financial year. That has now been withdrawn, and there is a presumption that local authorities will return to the full food hygiene and food standards programmes, and we have met with the FSA to discuss that, and we will look at that a little bit later on in the report at 2.19. So what I'm going to do now, Chair, if I may, is to pass over to Christina and to Will, who will take us through Appendix 1, which is the overall performance figures for the year. And I believe Jason is going to share screen so that we can do that for everyone to see.
Excellent, thanks, Helen. Welcome, Christina, and Will, if he pops up, and Jason.
Thanks, Chair. As always, a team effort with this one. So this is the performance reporting that we do for you at every meeting. But I'll obviously take the opportunity to go through this slide by slide to give you some context in terms of the figures that we are presenting. The first page relates to high risk food hygiene inspections, and when we're talking about high risk in this slide, we're talking about category A and B rated inspections. So category A are those inspections that require a frequency of once every 6 months, and category B once every 12 months. So these are indeed our higher risk premises within the programme. Pleasing to note that 100% of those inspections have been carried out, and it's looking good as an all green picture for this slide. Moving on to the next slide, here we have category C rated premises, those that require an intervention or an inspection from us once every 18 months. You'll note the colour red here in terms of performance, and of course this does relate back to the recovery plan that we've highlighted to you on a number of occasions. So whilst in terms of time it's come to the end of the recovery programme, the size and scale of SRS, the number of food businesses that we have in our area, means that we are still on the recovery programme in essence. However, we have had agreement with the FSA that we'll follow a risk-based approach with how we complete these category C rated inspections. Now, the recovery programme talked about non-broadly compliant premises, and those are premises scoring less than 3. We have completed all the outstanding category C of those in that nature, but now we're focusing on category category C, but a 4-star rating, so a score of 4 in terms of the food hygiene rating scheme. Again, trying to focus on that risk-based approach to ensure we're targeting our resources in the right area. We are seeing an increase in enforcement action and an increase of issues that we are when we get into premises, which again demonstrates the need for the frequency of these interventions to be visiting these premises on a regular basis. But again, we're seeing that the prosecutions coming through are reflecting some of our actions in that domain also. So moving down to the next slide relates to new businesses. Again, this is about following a risk-based approach to get to all of these premises. So agreement with the Food Standards Agency in terms of new businesses was to focus on those of a high risk nature in the first instance, based on the practices that they are, or some of the types of cuisine or the nature of their business in the first instance, rather than the lower risk premises. Moving on then is the broadly compliant figure. Again, as Helen mentioned, this is a performance indicator, which in essence doesn't look at our performance. It's more the performance of the food business is when we go out there based on our findings on inspection. At the moment, they're all looking good in terms of the number that are broadly compliant, so that 3 food hygiene ratings 3 or above. However, we are seeing that lots of support is required in terms of the food businesses in the area to gain compliance. Next slide relates to high risk trading standards inspections. Pleased to note that nearly all inspections were carried out other than 2 food standards inspections in Cardiff, which I understand relate to access issues, but I'm sure that those businesses have now been completed, but unfortunately they weren't done at the specified time frame. And the next page, in terms of new businesses, there is a direct link here for trading standards and food hygiene, in that in terms of food standards inspections, our food hygiene environmental health colleagues then, they undertake food standards inspections at the same time as food hygiene, say a buy one get one free, if you like, in terms of less burden on business. Now, what we'll find in terms of performance is that where the food hygiene statistics are lower, that will have obviously a direct impact on the trading standards new businesses. So hopefully give you a little bit of a flavour as to why that is focusing as red at the moment. Significant breaches is the last one, and I will pause to take some questions. And significant breaches relates to ongoing investigations in the Trading Standards Service, where an infringement has been identified, and there's a need to instigate an investigation. Now, the significant breach is an odd performance indicator in that it looks at those concluded within the financial year. However, because of timescales of that investigation, if, for example, we identify an infringement on the 30th of March, for example, that might be that we have 12 months to conclude that investigation, but that will show us one that's not concluded. So I hope I give some confidence in saying to you that we are certainly monitoring our investigations in terms of the legal timeframe we have to conclude our investigation. But hopefully that gives you an explanation in terms of the stats as to why that might not be 100%, but because of course that's just not possible in that instance. So I'll pause now, and conscious that Chair, you mentioned that you obviously have a question, and I'll obviously take questions in terms of food hygiene and trading standards.
Great, thanks for that, Christina. So I'll go to Councillor Siving-Naumann first, and then I'll come in afterwards.
I always love your reports, Christine, because you usually give us really, really disgusting photos as well. But I'm sure that's coming later. But so really, I just wanted, I know you will have told us over the year previously, but what kind of breaches are we talking about in terms of trading standards, and in terms of resolution? I'm assuming they're all positively resolved in terms of, you know, the business is continuing, and what kind of follow-up we do after that.
Okay, so in terms of the trading standards significant breaches, that is a sort of direct breach of the legislation. So trading standards is quite a varied subject area. So for example, that could be a rogue trader. It could be where an underage sales operation has been undertaken and somebody's failed that operation, and that's resulted in investigation. Or it could be a consumer complaint, which has resulted in a breach of the legislation. So the prosecution details that we report on at the end of each quarter, that would detail the type of breaches that would result in sort of a instigation of an infringement report, and whether that then goes on to prosecution. But very varied in nature and not a one specific. And also some of those breaches are quite easy to investigate and may not take much time. But for example, a rogue trader type investigation or a breach of the consumer protection from unfair trading regulations, that might be quite a complex investigation that takes up to a year to conclude or more. So I hope that answers you, Councillor Sifiniana. But yeah, definitely a mixed variety of investigations that goes on in the trading standards world.
Great, thanks for that, Christina, and thank you for the question, Councillor Sifiniana. And so just from me, I think it's in the narrative report rather than in the RAG statuses, but there is a mention of that we are seeing, and I think Helen touched on it earlier actually, of high scoring food premises then being revisited and having lower standards post-COVID. And I was just wondering if we looked into any of the sort of reasoning behind that. Is it to do with sort of staff having had sort of a period of time where they perhaps aren't being as adequately trained in health and safety as they perhaps were before, or is it something else that we're sort of missing that's resulting in the drops of standards?
A variety of reasons, Chair, and one thing that we are seeing in particular is there is a real shortage of staff in the hospitality industry. Some of the business that I've been dealing with myself recently has told me about the real shortage of staff within that area. And of course, you've got staff there working very long hours, and of course, the sort of transient nature of some of the staff in that industry as well, in that they come and go, and of course the training that's needed. We also saw over COVID that businesses were really diversifying in terms of what they were doing. We mentioned later on in the report the different cuisines that we're seeing in the area, and of course the food business really don't stand still in terms of what they're doing. They may set up as a new businesses focusing on one specific area, but then expand as a result. And of course, during COVID, because of course people weren't able to go out to restaurants, the takeaway industry, for example, was very much a thriving industry. So it may be the businesses that haven't expanded to really take on board the sort of customer base that they're seeing. But again, in food, what we really find, it is that Bobby on the beat nature that we have. They need to see our food officers on a regular basis. It almost keeps them on track in terms of the standards that we're seeing. And of course, because of the delay, because of the recovery, we are seeing without those interventions that the standards are perhaps declining in some areas, not all, because of course we still have very good businesses in our area also. But certainly, you know, we've got a very complex and varied food industry in SRS, very much particularly the capital city, very vibrant in terms of nature, and they are seen to be sort of diversifying, taking on more. And of course, we need to remain relevant in terms of us inspecting those businesses also. So yeah, I think it's just the challenges that we see in our environment in terms of recruitment and retention, that's very much there in the hospitality industry also.
Okay, great. That's really helpful. I, for one, am very pleased to see the diversification of the cuisine available. As someone who spent a long time in London, it's been great to move back and discover I can still get half decent Thai food when I need to, which is very important. Okay, cool. Does anyone else, any other member, have any questions for Christina on the food hygiene element of the report? Councillor Drake.
I just wanted to echo what you said about the change in hygiene. As somebody who's had a vegetarian diet the majority of my life, I really struggled a few years ago, but things have improved. I haven't got totally vegan, but I could get there. My grandson is vegan, so yeah, so it's good to see changes coming aboard.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Councillor Drake. If there's no other questions, I'll ask that we move on. So, Helen, what's next? Oh, we've got Will.
We have, yes. So
It's
I
Will
think
next, Jane.
Jason's going to put up some of my bank statuses. I'll be brief, Chair, because thankfully it's a relatively positive picture I can present the Joint Committee. Concentrating on noise and air and concentrating on the annual results. The first slide you have there is the targets for response times for domestic noise complaints, which is 3 days. And you'll see there that we've exceeded that annually, which is pleasing, as it was quite a challenging year. And certainly we did see some challenges post-COVID. You know, with the trend to people still working from home, and that sort of manifested in increased noise complaints maybe in the day when, you know, previously people would have been in work. So that's pleasing to note that we were able to respond to those in a timely fashion. If you could move on, Jace. So the next slide is our response times for commercial and industrial noise complaints, noise and air complaints, which is a more challenging response time of 1 day, and that reflects the fact that often with commercial and industrial complaints they do affect more than one member of the public, and we try to get there wherever possible, because sometimes we can affect an immediate change through interaction with the business. You'll see there that the trend in Q4 was green, and I think this reflects the fact that we are now, for the first time really since the SRS was formed, at full staffing levels across the service in these particular teams for the time being. Long may it continue. And so the overall trend was amber, but that only represented 39 complaints over a total of over 1,000. So now that we have a full complement of staff, I anticipate we'll continue with that trend into the future. The next one is a slightly odd response time, but it's for alarm complaints, which can cause significant nuisance in areas. And you'll see there that the annual target has been exceeded, and I think the one area where we missed was due to a complaint not being logged correctly. So that's positive. And then finally, from me, into our licensing response times and RAG statuses. Now these are uniformly green mostly, which is a reflection on the efficiency of the staff and the fact that we have statutory deadlines to meet there. Apart from one, which is the first time we've ever not had a full set of green results, and that is reflected on a licensing hearing in Cardiff, which was unable to go ahead because of the Queen's mourning period. So it was with the agreement of all parties concerned, it was postponed until after the period of national mourning. But the rest of the targets there, again, I'm happy to give compliments to the licensing team. Have reached all the targets that they need to there. So that's the noise and air pollution and licensing targets. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Great, thanks for that. Well, I mean, I think the results there really show that, you know, how much of an impact, if you look at something sort of overarchingly without reading the notes, it might look slightly worse than it is when actually it's perhaps one complaint that hasn't been quite dealt with in quite the exact amount of time as required. So yeah, thank you for that. I think it looks really positive. And there's no questions from me. I don't know about other members. Anyone for Will? Okay, Will, you're off the hook.
Thank you.
For the report, and I'll speak to you soon. Okay, so moving on, I think we're back to you, Helen.
Back to me, Chair. So if I can take everyone to 2.13 in the report, and this is to give a mention to something we've touched on already this morning, and that's our prosecution work. And you'll find that details of all the prosecution cases concluded in the 22-23 financial year are set out in the usual format in Appendix 2. I'm more than happy to answer questions on any of the cases of interest, either now or after the meeting. But I think if I were to just mention the fact that there's a really diverse bench this year representing the various sort of facets of the service, things like housing, food hygiene, food standards, use by dates, underage sales, taxi licensing, street trading, rogue trading and doorstep crime, noise nuisance, animal welfare, fraud and health and safety at work act. So really good representation across the service of the different legislation that is enforced. 28 cases concluded in the last financial year. There were 24 concluded in the previous year, and members will be familiar with the difficulties we've experienced post-COVID with delays in particularly in the court process. And as a benchmark, going back to the 2018-19 financial year, 77 cases concluded within that timeframe. So what we're sensing right now is that the momentum is picking up, and cases that have been in the court process, if you like, for quite some time are now starting to conclude. So I think we'll be reporting a bumper crop of cases this time next year. One example being the case that I notified members of on Monday, which was a Health and Safety at Work Act case, and that had been 6 years in the making. So these things do take time. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, or I can move on to the next section.
Anyone? No, let's move on then.
Okie doke. So 2.14 to 2.16, that just references some of the ways in which the service has provided corporate support to the three partner authorities. And then dropping down to 2.17, we'll start to look at some of the specific service achievements. And we've set these out in terms of the 5 strategic themes that we follow. So the first of those is improving health and well-being. And at 2.19, I'm going to hand you over to Christina again to look at food hygiene and food standards interventions. I'm mindful that we have probably covered quite a bit of this already. And then in the interests of smooth transition, we'll pick up from 2.24 onwards for his elements.
Great, thanks, Christina.
Thanks, Chair. So yes, Helen is quite right. In the update in terms of performance, we've mostly covered the update here in terms of food, as we were highlighting some of the challenges for us in the area, specifically in relation to the difference in cuisines and the enforcement nature that we're seeing. But in those paragraphs, we're also highlighting a very high profile prosecution that we undertook last year. I'm sure you will have seen it all over the media, and this is by far one of the worst in terms of standards that we've uncovered. It was in fact a Cardiff case, again, another one that that because of the delay, because of COVID, took a long time for it to get to trial. But we did go in the end have a 2-week trial on this, and some really good results. So the 3 defendants were given fines totaling 14,500, and order to pay costs totaling £10,000. Now, interestingly, the media really took this case on board, and we had fantastic coverage, and members of the public demonstrated real support in terms of what the officers were doing and their roles in this. So we don't always get that kind of response in terms of the work that we do, but it was really pleasing to see the public support in terms of food safety and the recognition of all the hard work that went into that case by officers. We have no doubt that defendant will appeal, and I think one is already lodged, so no doubt that the saga will continue. But again, you know, the last thing we want is to uncover those kind of practices, but it's really important that we take a firm, hard line on those that we uncover. So as I said, I provided most of that update previously during the performance, but any questions on that specific prosecution or other food matters, happy to take that at this time.
Thanks, Christina. I think it's worth noting as well, like actually in the last year, certainly we've had 1 or 2 quite well covered cases like this in Bridgend, not quite to the same level, but similarly the support that I think has been demonstrated from the public is really positive, particularly in one case where we did have an owner who decided that he would tell his side of the story to the press, and it didn't really go down particularly well with the public, and I think he may have shot himself in the foot a little bit. But yeah, it's really positive to see that the public is supportive of the work, and I think we can all accept that, you know, I don't think any of us want to eat at a restaurant that isn't conforming to the standards expected, and I think that is really positive, and I think the work of the team demonstrates that, and the fact that building that community buy-in, I think, is really remarkable. So thank you for that. Any questions from any members? No. Okay. Tag team back to Will then.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So if we turn to 2.24 of the report, in relation to building safety, over the year we've briefed Joint Committee on the various Welsh Government initiatives and policy strands being developed. Most recently, Welsh Government have consulted on the new arrangements to be put in place for Category 1 buildings. So Category 1 buildings are those multi-occupied buildings over 18 metres in height. These centre on having, for instance, a principal accountable person who will be responsible for detailing how fire safety and structural risks are managed and communicated with residents. Going back to the dreadful Grenfell disaster, one of the key issues that are raised there was that lack of accountability. So that is a piece of policy work that's being developed by Welsh Government. It's proposed at this stage that local authorities will be the regulator for those buildings and will have to maintain, amongst other things, a register of all buildings in its area. But I should stress that this work is still in the policy development stage. And, you know, I'm taking part as we speak in a number of workshops with Welsh Government, as are many other colleagues in this area. And what I suggest is when we have finalised plans, legislation and guidance, then we'll be able to brief the committee moving forward. So that kind of, it's a very movable feast at the moment, the world of building safety, and there's a lot of policy development work going on, but rest assured, you know, SRS are contributing to that. The second element I just wanted to briefly cover was the minimum energy efficiency standards, or MEES, and I can provide a positive update to members on work that has taken place since they were last briefed. You'll recall we were putting a team in place and providing some documentation to landlords and owners, and we've written to and emailed over 241 landlords and owners who are renting out either F or G rated rented properties according to our information. And the purpose of that is A, to advise them of the legislation, and secondly, to signpost them to opportunities to assist in improving the rating of their properties. I'm advised we're already starting to receive responses from landlords and owners in relation to that, and a second round of reminder letters is going out to those who haven't responded. So as we previously briefed and is in the report, the objective here is for us to brief back into the partner councils the impact of the work that we're undertaking in relation to these in terms of reduction in energy use, money saved, and reduction in carbon tonnage. So again, this is very much a work in progress, and I hope to be in a position over the coming months to report back on some of the successes we've had here. So that's just a very quick update really on those two areas, and I'm happy to take any questions from members if they have them.
Excellent, thanks, Will. I don't think there's anything from me. Any other members want to come in here? No? Okay, cool. Thanks a lot, Will.
Okay, I think it's moving over to Jason now. Sorry, Helen, I've stolen your thunder, but I'll disappear now. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I think it's back with me just quickly, and then over to Jason. So animal welfare 2.33, and I'll just touch on this briefly. And in particular, in relation to dog breeding, quite often unlicensed dog breeding. We haven't concluded any prosecution cases this year or in the last financial year. However, there are a number of quite troubling cases in the pipeline, which we will be obviously reporting on once they're concluded. This problem is not going away. It is a major problem in terms of workload for staff. And we took the opportunity to contribute to a Welsh Government consultation earlier this year with respect to animal licensing, and really pressing home the need for a much broader consideration of the dog breeding business. It isn't just about dog breeding, it's all those allied services, things like the provision of stud dogs, artificial insemination, other fertility services, which these individuals are providing to their clients, but they don't require any sort of licensing. So we are continuing to press that case, because this is an industry that is growing, unfortunately, with pretty devastating effect. And 2.36 just mentioned some of the media work that officers have been involved with in explaining our role in relation to some of our high-profile dog breeding cases, and really recommend if members are able to look those out, and really worth a watch. And then to conclude this section, 2.37, again, we're delighted that Animal Health and Welfare team has been recognised by the RSPCA Paw Prints Award scheme, and we've actually improved our crop of awards in the last financial year. So that was a very, very brief run through animal welfare. I'm happy to take questions or pass to Jason for the next section.
Great, thanks for that, Helen. I think one sort of question for me really is probably to do with my lack of knowledge more than anything else, but I know that certainly in Bridgend and even in my ward, in fact, we've seen an increase in the number of planning applications for kennelling. And I imagine that, this is sort of cause and effect of more people having adopted or bought dogs in the last few years following the pandemic. But I presume that then has, a knock-on effect for all of the other parts of the service. And I just wondered, in terms of sort of how we're connecting all of these things together, I think often there's noise complaints that come from kennelling, for example, and how are we making sure that when officers do go in, perhaps to investigate that or to investigate welfare, they are making sure that they're keeping their eyes open for any potential illegal breeding that might be taking place in these new establishments that have suddenly popped up.
Yeah, so officers will have their eyes open, and that will be very much on the radar, that whole picture of the premises, not just the particular reason that they're there. So yes, the kenneling, dog daycare is another big area. Lots and lots of individuals going into that, because, as you say, there are now dogs that were bought during lockdown which now need to be cared for during the day while families are back in work. So yeah, very much on the radar.
Okay, cool, thanks for that, Helen. I don't know if any other members have any questions around the animal welfare piece.
Just if I can come on that as well, Helen, just to what we're also seeing, Chair, is a lot of increases in dogs being abandoned and taken to our kenneling facilities as a result of people not being able to care for them from having to return to work and having bought them as lockdown puppies. So a lot of pressure on our local kenneling facilities there to try and rehome those dogs that are being brought in that aren't being looked after.
That's very, very interesting. Thanks for that, Jason. It hadn't occurred to me there. I wonder if perhaps then there's space for us maybe to be doing some sort of not marketing, that's probably the wrong word, but signposting people to, if you have taken on a dog and it is proving too much, that these are the responsible routes to take to move the dog onto a caring home, rather than sort of doing the irresponsible thing and abandoning them in random places to put them at risk, because I think that is a very sad state of affairs. Yeah, okay, cool. I don't see any other members popping up on my screen, so we'll carry on with Jason on air quality.
Yeah, thanks. Just bringing members' attentions to paragraphs 2.38 to 2.4, really just a summary of the reporting we've done on behalf of the three authorities as part of our statutory duties under Part 4 of the Environment Act, really. So just quickly touching upon what we reported to each of the separate cabinets, really. So the 2022 annual progress report for Bridgend obviously highlighted the continuing ongoing issue we have on Park Street and the declared air quality management area there, where we were still seeing concentrations in 2021 in exceedance of the NO2 standard. So as part of the work we've done through that this year, we consulted on the draft air quality action plan on a 12-week consultation supported with the communications team at Bridgend Council there. So that was a 12-week consultation running from the 29th of August through to the 21st of November, where we held in some drop-in sessions for members of the public to attend and answer any questions they may have on the plan. So that has allowed us to take on those board. Pretty much the responses on it were positive and generally supportive of the key priorities that we look to hopefully install. The feedback from Welsh Government, there's a small piece of modelling work that we need to do to try and project forward as to when compliance may be achieved in the air quality air quality management area, basically. So once that work is completed, we'll be able to take that final plan back to Cabinet and Bridgend for final approval for submission to Welsh Government. In Cardiff itself, the results recorded in 2021 were overall quite positive, really. We showed compliance at all the monitoring locations we monitored in Cardiff. We still felt, looking at the traffic levels in Cardiff, that there was still some residual impacts from the early lockdowns that occurred in 2021, and traffic levels in Cardiff were about 20% lower than the pre-COVID level. So had some continued impacts there, really. So it will be interesting when we do the report for 2022's results to see where those are. But a big piece of work that SRS still supported Cardiff on was the continuation of the Clean Air Plan, which was the specific action that the Cardiff Council has to look at under a legal direction from Welsh Government for the issues faced at Castle Street, and some further detailed air quality modelling and transportation work has been undertaken there to allow Cardiff Council to look at a permanent scheme to install on Castle Street, and Cabinet did make a decision in April on that, and it's back with Welsh Government to make a final decision to approve that final plan, which will be coming forward in the coming weeks. And then in the Vale of Glamorgan, again, the annual progress report for 2022 showed overall air quality in the Vale of Glamorgan remains very well and no exceedance of the NO2 air quality objective, and also continued compliance in the previous air quality management area off Windsor Road. So happy to take any questions on any of the air quality issues presented in the report, if members need any questions answered.
Great, thanks for that, Jason. I don't think there's anything from me. I know we discuss Park Street quite often, so
Yeah,
I'm relatively up to date on that. Do any other members have any questions for Jason on air quality? No. Okay.
okay, I'll move on to the next area, which is the safeguarding the vulnerable. So obviously SRS does contribute to this, the safeguarding agendas for the three authorities, partner authorities, ensuring that children are protected from harmful substances and products, and obviously our older and vulnerable people are protected from unscrupulous individuals and traders. Just some key highlights there over the year of the service. So SRS received 196 complaints or intelligence logs relating to underage sales of alcohol, vapes, tobacco and knives. So using this intelligence and assisting with young volunteers, we undertake 60 attempts to take test purchases of age-restricted products during the year. So of 13 of these attempts actually did result in positive sales of either alcohol or cigarette vapes, which was at 22% success rate on that, really. And obviously the details of all the underage sales have been reported in Appendix 2, but we've just highlighted one case here, really, where two volunteers went in, but one age 15 and one age 16. They went in to buy a box of dark fruit cider, which was priced at £12.99. So they did take that to the counter. The shopkeeper did actually question the volunteers of what their age was, and the one volunteer said he was 15 and wasn't 18. The shopkeeper did advise him that you did need to be 18 to buy the alcohol, but actually didn't refuse the sale. And then actually proceeded to charge the volunteer for the box of cider at £12.99, but adding an additional £1 and 1p to the purchase price, and then provided to remove the cans from the box, put them into opaque carrier bags and let them leave the shop. So it actually transpired that the shopkeeper was claiming to be the designated premise supervisor, but he actually wasn't. He provided false license details to the licensing department, and this, as a result, actually the store was therefore trading without a DPS in place. So overall, the business owner himself was fined £640 for selling the alcohol to an underage person. It was fined £640 for not having a DPS in place, and also £640 for supplying false information. So he was also ordered to pay a cost of £500 and a victim surcharge, giving a total there of over £2,600, basically. So quite an interesting case on that, really. And then in terms of doorstep crime and road builder cases, quite a few cases came forward on this part of work. And it's the usual story. We are faced with residents who are usually vulnerable, being defrauded of large sums of money. Sometimes, entire life savings are wiped out. And the cases continue to show the pattern, really, where no work being done. Contractors, say they're going to turn up and do work and don't actually turn up. Or if they do turn up and do some work, it's usually to a very poor standard, where we have to get independent expert witness reports to prove that the work is of a poor standard. And in most cases, residents are faced with large remediation bills to actually fully rip out the work and having to start again, really. So a number of cases did conclude this year, which combined, just can be given some figures there, where in total nearly 3 years in custodial sentences were handed down, a 12-month community order was given out, 150 hours of unpaid work, cost of £750, and compensation of over £6,000 was returned for some of those victims affected. And finally, just touching upon the Wales Illegal Money Lending Unit, which SRS hosts on behalf of all of Wales. The unit works really closely with other public agencies, including housing providers and other third sector organisations who are really at the front line, and they encounter a lot of the victims of loan sharks, and really gives us a good intelligence basis to get intelligence as to where activities are undertaken. I've seen Councillor Lewis, you've come in and just raised your hand.
Yeah, just to say, Jason, I'm involved with community pantries in Bridgend Borough, and we had somebody come out from there to give a talk,
Yeah,
and that proved really useful because a lot of our customers are vulnerable.
yeah,
So that was a really good service. So thanks for that.
yeah. That's brilliant. Yeah. So just coming on to that, I think that was our illegal money lending team that did that basically. So we exactly that. We've gone to food banks, we've gone to housing associations, a lot of community groups throughout the year. Really, over 46 different organisations were attended and training given to these organisations for them to identify and see the signs of where potentially these vulnerable people are targeted of loan sharks, and then how to report that to us on that release. So we've, as I said, 46 organizations and actually almost 900 people attended training events, which represents a 36% increase in the number of training that we've given, really. And that may boil down to where in October, we actually did a full rebrand of the illegal money lending unit, as we previously reported to the Joint Committee, and have now rebranded as Stop Loan Shark Wales, really to get the message home from that, really. So we did a 4-week campaign in the autumn, leading up to run to Christmas, really, and it ran across all social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and then we also targeted some hotspots of Neath, Port Talbot, Wrexham and Caerphilly with what we had, these digivans, which had all the new logo and some key messages about illegal lending in these places, really. So they were based where we had intelligence of loan sharks being operational, really. So we had a new website launched at that, and it's really just getting the key messages out to our partners and, you know, public sector partners, it's really of what Loan Shark Wales is and Stop Loan Shark Wales, and getting that out. We also had some media interest on some of the cases we had, and at the end of the year, we did some work with Cardiff City and Swansea football teams, where we were advertising at some of their home games on the LED screens, really just getting out some key messages and the brand out there, really. So I'll stop there and take any questions should any members have any.
Thanks for that, Jason. I'm now, you know, at a loss to know why Councillor Lewis got a visit to her pantry and I didn't get one to mine. But it's all right. I'll drop you an email, because that would be definitely really useful. And I'm sure, you know, across all of our communities, this is a problem. I think particularly in a world where, you know, money is even tighter than it used to be, and even if it isn't your life savings, if it's a couple of £100, that can really make the difference between, you know, keeping that roof over your head, keeping those bills paid, and keeping those members of the family fed. So I think it is a tremendous issue, and I think it's really positive work. I just wanted to pick up on one other bit. So on the sort of mystery shopper piece, I know that it sort of says that there's 13 attempts to purchase alcohol or e-cigarettes, and I just wondered what the breakdown of that was, because I think, you know, from what I'm sort of seeing quite a lot within the communities and the community I represent, is that there is this big increase in young people vaping, and I think that does seem to be the trend of the moment. That's, you know, it's not so much boxes of cider anymore. It's, you know, an energy drink and a vape. So I was just wondering what the breakdown of that was, and how much of a spike we're seeing in terms of the difference between illegal tobacco and illegal vapes.
Yeah, probably Chris should already come in on this, really, because it's Chris's. I've taken over that section to report on it, but it's actually Chris's trading standards teams that do those underage sales test purchases, really. So I'm sure she'll be able to provide the detail on that if she's got it to hand.
Come on,
so
Chris.
I can give you a detailed breakdown, Councillor Goody, if you'd like, following this meeting. But you're absolutely right in terms of the observations that you're making. Intelligence that we're receiving at the moment in terms of vapes far exceeds the other underage and restricted products. So vapes does seem to be the new thing, and the intelligence coming in is thick and fast in relation to that. We are still getting some in terms of alcohol, and the underage sales operations that we do is very much intelligence focused. So we'll have received a complaint or logs coming in from the community identifying that premise, and that's why we're targeting them. We've also done pieces in terms of providing advice to all the businesses in the the area, so they should be fully compliant. They know about the law. But of course, these are ones that we are hearing from the community. We're hearing from members that are specific issues. But yes, it's interesting. We seem to be moving away from the sort of illicit tobacco as was, and vapes is most definitely the new thing, and very attractive to young people.
Yeah, it's trading standard. It's one of the top priorities for Trading Standards of Wales going forward for the year and beyond, probably, Chair. So it's very high on the agenda.
Okay, great. Thank you both for that update. So I've got 2 hands up, so I'll take Councillor Lewis first, if I may.
Yeah, just
Councillor
going
Lewis.
back to Jason, when we had our presentation, what surprised me was the case studies. It's not this big bald guy up the road with a pit bull lending money. One was a 73-year-old man. And they take people's cash cards away from them, and that really astonished me.
Yeah.
You know, it really did shed a whole new light on it, if you like. And, you know, we have really promoted in our pantry, you know, about not using loan sharks. And to my knowledge, we're in a small village and it's not going on here, but you just don't know.
Yeah, it's exactly that, Councillor Lewis. You know, it is a lot of community lending, you know, and people saying, oh, a friend of a friend will lend you some money if you're short this week, and they end up getting caught in this vicious circle. They're having to continue to lend off that person and lending more money off them to pay them back what they already owe. They just get trapped in a vicious circle, and it's quite surprising who the actual loan sharks turn out to be. It's not your sort of, you know, regular sort of, you know, the sort of billing you see on TV sort of type thing. You know, it would be very surprising. It is just, you know, people who live next door to other people and are just normal people, really, who would appear to be normal people, but actually undergoing this illegal activity.
Yeah, thanks
Yeah,
for that.
thank you.
Thanks for that, Jason. It does, you know, I know I've certainly seen in my patch, you know, those people who sort of start off as offering to go and pick up some groceries for someone, and it's interesting how quickly that sort of low level increases, and suddenly it's like, oh, well, you know, I took a £5 to do that, and then it sort of increases from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very good point, Councillor Lewis. I think we all sort of have that default thing in our head of what a loan shark looks like, and that may not actually be the reality our communities are seeing. So I'll go on to Councillor Drake. What's your question, Councillor Drake?
I wanted to raise my concern about vaping, what damage it can do to these young people. Because 60 years ago, we probably wouldn't have realised what damage tobacco was doing to people's lungs. And of course, there's a lot of counterfeit vaping going on, and you really don't know what's actually in these products. And it's very, very worrying. I don't know what we can do about it, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Drake. I mean, again, I think certainly from my point of view, there's definitely a question of, understandably, vapes being marketed to adults as a positive step away from tobacco. But I think that, you know, I actually had a conversation with my 9-year-old last week about this, where he was like, okay, I'm never going to smoke, I'll just vape. And I was like, over my dead body, you will. But it is that difficulty. I think we all have a responsibility, I think, as public servants, to be going out there and making sure that understanding that vaping may be better than smoking cigarettes for someone who is addicted to smoking cigarettes, but someone who doesn't smoke at all, this is not a safe or positive step to take in your life, particularly as you know, Councillor Drake, that, you know, particularly with illegal vapes, who knows what is in them, and even within the regulated vapes, it's a questionable thing. And I think there are standards that need to be caught up with, perhaps, that we haven't quite got to yet.
It's very worrying, isn't it? Yeah, because my husband died of cancer, and that was caused many, many years ago by the damage he did when he was smoking.
Yeah.
So so we don't know what's going to happen in the future, do we?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Councillor Drake. Does any other member have any points you want to raise before we let Jason off the hook? No? Okay, cool. Thanks a lot for that, Jason. It's an interesting update.
Yeah, I think Helen's picking up the rest of.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, so we are on supporting the local economy now. Chair 2.51. I won't dwell on this. I'm conscious of time. There's some hopefully interesting facts and figures in the paragraphs that follow. But just to again give a mention to illegal tobacco, which we're highlighting here, and some of the work against counterfeit products, including counterfeit vapes, and absolutely echo all of those thoughts that we just had on vaping. It is the big issue for us going forward, no doubt about that. And in this context, in supporting the local economy, our work to take firm action against the rogues and those who are flouting the law, and at the same time, that work protects the local legitimate businesses. So hopefully some useful information in that section. And then I will drop down to maximising the use of resources. And again, I won't dwell on this. This will be familiar territory for members. We report on this quarterly. Some very positive stats there on use of the website and our following on social media. Again, all really, really important about getting those key messages out. And then dropping down to 2.62, which is the last paragraph in this section. It's a note about our success, I guess, in the last year in starting to recover some of our income generation ability, which had to be pretty much parked during COVID when attention turned to all the other functions that we were fulfilling. So very encouragingly, we're now starting to pick up on that area of income generation, and some examples given there as to exactly how we're doing that. So that concludes the service-specific input. Again, happy to take any questions on those last two sections. I'm conscious I've whistled through those a little.
So there's just one from me, which is more of a suggestion, really. I think something that I get quite a lot from councillors within my local authority is sort of knowing where to report things or how to help residents report things. Obviously, you know, we have internally our systems to do that. But I wondered if it was maybe something we could look at as a sort of infographic or similar for councillors, sort of signposting to the Noise app, signposting to the website, the Twitter, as well as sort of, you know, the standardised routes of raising a referral with the service. Because I think, you know, increasingly, you know, I get sort of emails to my inbox asking me questions about this, which I know, luckily for you, Helen, you often get forwarded on to you. But you know, it is one of those things of like helping colleagues know where they can report things, and you know, making use of things like the Noise app. You know, I have similar conversations with residents around how they report things in terms of, you know, traffic violations to South Wales Police or the council, and that actually you don't need to bring 111 and you don't need to ring the council. There's actually a website that you can do it through, but the number of people that actually are aware of that is very low. So I think anything we could do to help raise that knowledge would be really welcome.
I think that's a great idea, Chair. I'm happy to look at that.
Excellent. Any other quick questions on the end of the report for Helen before we move on? No? Okay.
So to conclude the report, Chair, 2.91, because obviously we've had the finance information at the outset. That really just sets out what our key milestones will be for the coming year. Again, they're bulleted there, pretty much as you might expect, all against the backdrop of the cost of living crisis and all the work that we do to support businesses and communities through that, while operating within a reduced resource. So hopefully that has been a useful run through of the annual report for the 23-23 financial year. And just to come back to the recommendations, so it's firstly that the Joint Committee approves the report and authorises the Chief Executive of the Vale of Glamorgan Council to forward a copy of the report to the heads of paid service for the other partner councils. And the second recommendation is that the 22-23 unaudited outturn position is noted.
Right. I think so. Thank you for the report. Thank you for all the officers that have presented that with us today. I think this is an opportune moment really for me as chair, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of our members, to note the amazing work that SRS officers carry out throughout the year. And I think, you know, it's a remarkable thing. I think in one of the points of the report, I think it says staff of the shared service never fail to amaze in all that they do. And I think that is true. And I hope that all officers on this call will go back to their teams and reflect our thanks to them for the tremendous work that they carry out across our boroughs. Councillor Siving-Arnhem?
No, I just wanted to echo that, Chair. Brilliant work, a brilliant year's work, and you know, really proud. And you know, and actually, you know, when Helen and I first started looking at the budget, it was looking, you know, it was looking very grim. And you know, we've moved a hell of a lot further from that. So yeah, really well done. And you know, thanks very much, and keep up the good work, guys.
Yes, thank you for that, Councillor. I think we can all agree with that, particularly, you know, in the face of next year's budget round, which I'm sure we're all excited about getting started with. But yeah, thank you for that. So I think it leaves me then to ask for support for the report. So I'm happy to take movers and seconders at this point.
I can move that, Chair.
I'll
Excellent.
second it.
Excellent. Thank you both. Okay, so that's that done. So moving on now to point 8 on the agenda, which is the business plan, which is a report for noting. Helen, is this you taking us through this?
It is me, Chair. Yeah, and hopefully again this will be familiar territory, so I can go through this quite quickly. So the opening part of the report, it sets out the context why we produced the business plan, and this is actually our 9th business plan. So again, it goes back to the joint working agreement and the fact that we need to produce this. The report talks about how it's that sort of line of sight, it's the golden thread that runs through the corporate priorities of the 3 partner authorities. They're kind of distilled, if you like, into the 5 SRS strategic themes, and then that translates into the different areas of work that we plan to do in the coming year. So the business plan itself, it sets out obviously some information about the service. It reviews successes and challenges over the previous year, 22-23, and it looks forward to what we will be achieving in the coming year. And to arrive at that work programme is very much a two-way process. So it's taking that sort of strategic view, what's on the horizon, what are the emerging issues that we need to be addressing, and also engagement with team managers and with staff to understand operationally what those how those key issues are presenting themselves. So I think we've done a good job in pulling that together for the 23-24 business plan. Now, you will be aware that I do apologise if you can hear, there's a rag and bone man just outside the window. So if that gets really loud, that's what it is.
If you've got any scrap, Helen, now's the time.
I'm going to just run out with that old fridge, if that's okay.
If you could check he's got a licence first, that would be really appreciated.
Yes.
Thank you.
So members will be aware that yesterday an additional supplementary information paper was presented or made available for members. So if I can take you to 2.3 in the report, and it talks here about how the draft business plan, as we always do, is being consulted on with stakeholders. So we've had some feedback from that engagement, which I'll highlight in a second. And also I went to, for pre-decision scrutiny, I went to the Vale of Glamorgan Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee meeting on last Wednesday, the 14th of June. And the supplementary information you will see is the thoughts and recommendations of that scrutiny committee on the business plan, and their suggestion that those elements could be reflected in the draft plan. So it was to highlight that with members, to ensure that they were cited on that and that they were happy with those suggestions, which then could be woven into the draft plan. And then once we've done that with the other feedback that we've had, then we would obviously circulate the updated plan for everyone. So what the Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee has suggested, as you'll see in that supplementary information, is that the business plan should identify the need for a clear process through which any significant reprioritisation of services undertaken by SRS would be decided by the partner councils. In the context of ongoing cost pressures, such as those resulting from the cost of living crisis, consideration should be given as to how such a reprioritisation exercise would be communicated and consulted upon as part of the process through which a final decision is made. A lot of this goes back to the joint working agreement and what has been set out for SRS to provide on behalf of each of the 3 partner councils. But I think this point that's been made is more about how is that going to be communicated back? What is the engagement so that various views are captured? So that was the first thought of the scrutiny committee. And then the other one, it chimes with something you mentioned a little bit earlier about the infographic and, you know, getting information out about contact and service and key messages, etc. And this ask was that the plan would touch on how elected members could be more engaged on some of these key issues, and through their contacts with residents and businesses could help in getting some of those key messages out. So, you know, a really positive suggestion there. And some of that partnership theme came out from the consultation with stakeholders too. One other suggestion that has been made, and again, this sort of chimes with the suggestion of an infographic, is that fantastic business plan, all singing, all dancing, lots of facts, figures, information, pictures in there. But how about an executive summary so that it is more of a bite-sized piece that we could circulate, and I think we'll get a lot more buy-in potentially, and maybe that's something that we can do through elected members' networks. So those are the suggestions that have been made. I don't know whether we need to pause at that point, Chair, or whether I should conclude the report.
I mean, I think it all makes perfect sense to me. I mean, the only thing I would add is I think it may be worth us looking at how we maybe put in place a sort of cadence of attendance to the full councils of the 3 constituent boroughs, because I think, you know, in terms of delivering the snapshot, I think that's a really good idea. I think having infographics and executive summaries are really brilliant, particularly for elected members who aren't part of this committee but are interested in the information available, but perhaps don't want to dive into another 100-page report, because as we all know, we get a lot of 100-page reports. So I think that's a really good idea, but I think it would be also really useful to have that perhaps presented to full councils, either I guess the annual report or the business plan, to present that opportunity for questions and for elected members to sit and see a presentation that perhaps does dive a bit deeper into the information rather than the very top lines. But yes, I'm more than happy to take that. Do we need to vote on an amendment to it, or is it just a suggestion?
The suggestion from the scrutiny committee.
Yeah.
If we'd had more time, then I would have probably woven some of that in and then presented the report as it then stood today. I didn't have that opportunity, so the report had been circulated. I didn't want to send another amended one because it also starts to get a bit confusing. So this seemed to be the better way to present to Joint Committee what the suggestions have been. And I guess it would be the blessing of the Joint Committee that those themes, if everyone is happy, are woven in to the existing report, and are reflected in that way.
Okay, I mean, I think the easiest way to do this, and Democratic Services do shout at me if I'm wrong, but if I just ask, are there any objections to adopting these suggestions? I think it's probably the easiest way forward.
I
No?
think that's okay, Chair.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll take those as an affirmative through the negative, as it were. And then I think we just need to conclude the report, yes?
Yes, so I can conclude that quickly, Chair, with the recommendation. So that's that the look here. For some reason we got scrutiny committee. Yeah, I do apologise. I'm on the wrong report. So, and I can't find it now. I do apologise.
Oh,
So
I
I don't know if you've got
haven't
the. Don't know if you've got the report in front of you, Chair, for the
Yes.
recommendation.
So the recommendations, sorry, Vale of Morgan reports are reversed to the ones we have in Bridgend.
Yeah,
So
it's
our
right, there's-
recommendations, right at the top, are to the Joint Committee notes the contents of the report and approves the SRS business plan, and that the head of Shared Regulatory Services is authorised to make administrative amendments to the business plan if the need arises. That sounds good to me. Could I have a member to move and a member to second?
I'll move that, Chair.
And I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you very much, councillors. Okay, cool. That concludes that then, and on to our next report, which I think is the final report, which is item number 9 on the agenda, which is the Health and Safety Enforcement Service Plan 23-24, and I think we're back to Christina for the report.
That's right. Thank you, Chair. So yes, you're right. This report relates to the Section 18 Health and Safety Service Plan. This is a report that we are required to do every year. So we, as you know, and together with the Health and Safety Executive, the HSE, we're responsible for the enforcement of the Health and Safety at Work Act. Section 18 of the Health and Safety at Work Act requires us every year to produce this plan, which details how in effect we are going to prioritise health and safety enforcement for the 3 areas. The plan itself demonstrates what the demands are on the service, what risk-based work programme we are setting out to do, and the resource available. Now, unlike food hygiene, this isn't a case of carrying out inspections on a category basis. What happens is the HSE produce a document every year which identifies what the priorities are or interventions that are required based on intelligence and what's happened the previous years. That document is called the LAC 67 document. We use that document then to inform us, based on our own complaints and the things that we've been dealing with, to set out what the programme of interventions are for the year ahead. Along with that, of course, we've got our response work, which details complaints received, responses to RIDON notifications and so on. But again, that informs the plan as to why it is we're choosing to focus on these specific interventions. I'm not proposing to go through the plan in any detail. I'm sure you've all read it. It was an extremely busy year for the health and safety team last year. Certainly, cost of living crisis is seeing an impact on the things that we are seeing during these interventions. And really noteworthy, on page 34 of the plan details the trampoline park, which we discussed earlier on in this meeting, and that fantastic results for prosecution that we've had this week. So worth a read on that basis. Now, that's again received lots of media highlights, which is really, really good to see. And again, it is another intervention required across the country in terms of those type of premises. So in terms of recommendations for this report, Chair, it is to approve the draft health and safety enforcement plan and to authorise Helen as the head of service to make administrative amendments. As I said, happy to take any questions in relation to the plan, but not planning to go through that plan page by page.
Great, I appreciate that. Thanks, Chris. Do we have any questions from members? No. Okay, cool. Well, I think, let me just check the recommendations of the report. So the recommendations of the report are to approve the Health and Safety Enforcement Service Plan 23-24 and authorise, much like the last recommendation, to authorise the Head of Regulatory Services to make administrative amendments as required to the plan. If we're all happy, can I have a mover and a seconder?
I'll move that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Drake. And a seconder?
I'll second it, Chair.
Brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Lewis. So that is done. So thank you for that, Chris. And I think that brings us to the conclusion of the meeting. Item 10 is any items which the Chair has decided are urgent. I haven't received anything that I consider to be urgent. So that would be the end of the meeting, I believe. So unless Helen wants to come and shout at me, or Democratic Services want to come and shout at me, excellent, my favourite kind of way ending the meeting. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time today to be part of the committee, and I'm sure we'll see you all soon.